So thank you all for joining me this morning, this afternoon, wherever you're coming in from. We have folks from the East Coast to the West Coast, the islands even. So thank you so much for participating in this important conversation with my special guest, Steve Kadish, first Chief of Staff to Governor Charlie Baker and co-author of the book, Getting Beyond Politics to Get Important Work Done. He and Governor Baker wrote this book, and I have the pleasure and honor of interviewing him not once, but twice as part of the Leadership at Work series. Steve, thank you so much for joining me and participating in this important conversation.
Jessie, thank you for doing this. And I really look forward to the discussion, and a hello to Laurel.
Hi, Laurel. So I want to share a little bit about your background. I trust everyone has received a copy of the bio, but your bio, your background is pretty impressive. You've led through so many changes and challenges for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Prior to joining the Baker administration as the first Chief of Staff, you served as Senior Vice President, Chief Operating Officer at Northeastern University, Executive Vice President, Chief Financial Officer at Dartmouth College, Director of Global Health Equity at Brigham and Women's Hospital, Massachusetts Undersecretary for Health and Human Services, Massachusetts Assistant Secretary for Administration and Finance, Senior Vice President for Administration at Harvard Pilgrim Health, Associate Vice Chancellor of Operations at UMass Medical, and Assistant Commissioner for Operations at Massachusetts Division of Medical Assistance. And if that was not enough, you served as the Special Advisor to the Massachusetts COVID Command Center. So you have an amazing background. You've done so much, very impressive history and experience. Your bio, I'm sure it doesn't tell the whole story, but what should we know about you that your bio does not tell us?
Jessie, I apologize to everyone for having to read through all of that. And it says two things. One, I'm old, and two, maybe I can't hold a job for very long. So
I don't think that's it. I think you have a track record of solving big problems. And clearly, whether it's in government, healthcare, higher education, or other sectors, you're the go-to guy for solving these types of challenges. So I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about you. What is not in your bio that you would want us to know about you?
What an interesting question. I'll say two or three things. First, my work career has really been around helping people who are in the top leadership role try to accomplish what their big goals are. And two, I have been for 30 years longer really interested in systematic approaches to addressing problems. So I was very intrigued early on by just the concept of project management, and then everything from Lean Six Sigma and on, and just the theories of how you improve and address things. And then three, I really care about people, and I care about my colleagues. I feel blessed with my family, and the thing that I have always tried to do in work is not to make it, is to make it about the individuals that are affected, whether it's the individual who's the receiver of the service or the individuals who are trying to deliver it, and to walk in their shoes. And I'll stop there, Jessie.
And I can say that is that's definitely true. So I'll share a story here. Um, when I joined the administration, I was recruited to address the legacy issues that contributed to the collapse of the T and some challenges with transportation overall. And if anybody lived in Massachusetts in 2015, 2014, it was Snowmageddon, which was really a traumatic winter for a lot of people. And we had these series of meetings, and everybody who was in these meetings were on the hot seat, and they had to present on a number of challenges. And there was a narrative around the work that I was doing. And I decided to meet with you after one of those meetings, and I said, you know, would you mind if we got together, and I wanted to share with you what I was working on, because I wanted to kind of control the narrative, if you will. And Steve, you met with me. I shared a PowerPoint presentation of all the things that my team and I were working on. And then you looked at me and you said, wow, you're doing a lot. Are you and your team is doing all this? And I said, yeah. And you offered your help, not just in terms of consultants and FaceTime with the right people and being part of important meetings to be part of the decision-making process, but you offered members of your own team. And you said to me, you can have anyone on my team except for these 3 people. And I absolutely took you up on your offer. So clearing the way for people to get the job done is certainly part of your MO. But how have you evolved as a leader, given your tremendous work experience, professional experience, and some of the volunteer work that you do? How would you describe your evolution were you always this way?
I think this is from the benefit of being older and just thinking about things, is that I think in my 30s, I was much more of a snotty know-it-all, and was 30s and in my 40s more about less about the end product and more about the what was the implication for me. And when I had the experience of several things not working out, and then some other personal experiences, and I just really came to honestly appreciate that there are a ton of good, smart people who are almost always trying to do their best, and that how to work with people and enable people, and was really a lot about how I then thought about the how of solving problems, and continued to come back to what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and then taking a step back and saying the problem that we're trying to solve has to be a point of pain that a customer is feeling, and or a point of pain that somebody who's delivering the service is feeling. So it was really an evolution of how important people are, and that, and then combining that with probably in a crazy and attention to detail on the actual how to deliver results.
And so, just going back to your growth as a leader, what would you say was your worst moment, and what did you learn about yourself in that?
Um, Why, Jessie? I can think of several. Um, I can think work-wise when we, um, and I'll call it, it was mostly framed as a very large IT project at Medicaid, called Mass Health in Massachusetts, and it failed. And and what we had to do to roll back from that. I can think of another incident at one of the universities I worked at, and if Cassandra's still on, it's not your university, it was at Dartmouth, where we tried to roll out an across the campus initiative, and it bombed, and what it took to recover from that. And then personally, I can recall twice, which isn't a good thing because I didn't learn, is just how I so wore myself out that I ended up in the hospital. So you think after doing that once, you'd learn, but it took me twice.
So as leaders, we have a tendency to want to save people and save things, and kind of take on more than we frankly are capable of, because we're limited human beings. What is one thing you've changed about your approach to leading, that allows you to really um, prioritize self-care so that you have the fuel, the wherewithal, the mental fortitude, to be effective where you are?
Jessie, I'm at Harvard Kennedy School, and right now I'm not full time, and I'm doing a bunch of project work. I'm doing something for the World Bank, and have been involved with a variety of other projects. But my advice to people who have followed me, and especially over the last few years, is please take the time to do whatever it is that you do to take care of yourself. I especially recommend any kind of exercise, whether that's walking or whatever you do for exercise, because in these leadership jobs, you tend to do a lot of sitting, and an incredible amount of, you're carrying an incredible amount of responsibility and accountability, and that take care of yourself physically, which will help in turn take care of yourself mentally. And so make that time to do the walk, do the exercise, whatever it is that you do, and it will help you in your work. It will help you in your life.
Thank you. So let's pivot to the book. And a few of my clients and colleagues have it. So I just want to highlight that if you want, you can get the book and get 20% off with the St. Cyr Results 2022 code, which expires at the end of this month, June 30. So make sure you get the book. Anybody who knows me knows I don't promote people or books unless I believe in them and I've read them myself and think it would be of value to my clients and my network. So go and get the book. So let's pivot to that book and talk about why this book, why now?
Yeah. Thank you, Jessie. There were two reasons that we focused on the book, and I'll boil it down to hope and to how. And the idea of hope, and for folks that have read the book and have written me notes about it, the goal here was to hopefully re-inspire current public sector leaders, managers, executives and to inspire folks that might be interested in the public sector or work in and around the public sector. And the idea of hope is to soar a little bit, is to honor the idea of public service. It's hard, and is to really acknowledge that. And the focus on how is one of the things that distinguishes this book, we think, from a lot of others, and we really couldn't find a comparable book. There are books on budgeting, on leadership, on innovation, but there aren't, and then there are cases that are helpful, but there aren't books that help describe a pretty simple process that can be used in the local, state, and even federal level about how to take an idea and bring home the results. And so it's this focus on how, with some tips. And is that something that Governor Baker and I, on and off for over 30 years, have spent time on? It was, can we capture this? Can we write it down in a way that is understandable and replicable? And that was our goal: inspiration or re-inspiring, and a focus on how.
And the know-how, I think, is really important. And you talk about developing a team, and the team should be balanced with the operational person as well as the person who has the knowledge, but not necessarily the practical application experience. And can you talk about the way that you and the governor develop your team? You talk about this in the book, and I actually want to preface this question with a statement in the book that talks about really the differences between you and Governor Baker. You said, we are a lifelong Republican and lifelong Democrat. We are Protestant and a Jew. Charlie is a politician and Steve cannot speak on the stump. But we have a long history of working together in Massachusetts, and also building the teams to be able to lead effectively. So talk about the makeup of the teams, and how you are able to really bring so many different perspectives together and still get the work done.
Well, hopefully this interview isn't an example of how Steve can't speak on the stump, but I'm trying to get better at talking in these kinds of settings. We always start with people when we're addressing a problem, and as recently as yesterday, the governor and I were talking about an issue, and we first started talking about, well, what is the problem? I love when he comes back to, well, what is the problem? What's the what that we're trying to attack? And then started talking about people. And what's unusual in the public sector is, and I wish it was just the way things were, is we don't pay attention to whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, or a Green, but it's really focused on your know-how, your knowledge, and your diversity of experience. And there are people who are really good at and really know about policy, program, can translate data into the so what's in terms of what it means for programs and so forth. And then there are people who are really good at the operational side of marshaling and organizing the people, the tech, the finances into actually delivering on those programs. And governor in interviews, when we were interviewing the cabinet especially, would spend more time on, I'd say more on the policy end, and he'd have me spend more time focused in interviewing people on uh, their experience and know-how in terms of running something, the management, the operation side. And well, I'm gonna say that's one big item. The second thing is, I so believe that in every organization, there are great people in the organization, even if there are um, unhappy or terrible circumstances, and that it's so important to build from the strength that is within an organization, and to, particularly for organizations that are facing issues, and to add additional people, resource, and thinking. And the combination of the two is incredibly powerful. So a respect for those folks that are are really strong in the organization, and that isn't going to be everyone, but every organization has strong people in it. And how do you elevate and honor and respect and build from that? And because you're in a problem, what additional resources and expertise do you bring in? So I'm a great believer in, um, uh, what I almost call rookies and veterans, not rookies from being, inexperienced, but I guess new people and veterans in terms of creating great teams.
And so you also talk about in the book that when leading change, you're coming in as a new administration, there are a series of legacy issues. DCF, Department of Children, Family Services, the MBTA has collapsed. The T was never really at the top of the agenda, but in the book, you and Governor Baker talk about the many people who warned you not to take on the T and not to take on transportation. And so you're coming in as a new administration. There are legacy issues. There are folks who have been there, not just in transportation, but other agencies for a long time. Talk about just maybe the collision of the new guard and the old guard and coming together, and some of the challenges that you had to address around the culture, and then how you were able to make a path through to start seeing some progress and change.
So I had the advantage, I'll call it the advantage and the experience of having worked for Michael Dukakis, Governor Dukakis, a Democrat, in the late 80s, for Governor Bill Weld, a Republican, and then Paul Cellucci, Republicans, in the 90s. And I worked in agencies, not in the central command area, not in the governor's office, not in the administration and finance, but out in the agencies. And honestly, I used to strongly dislike when the governor's office called, and then because they weren't helpful generally, and they were I'll leave it at that. And then and when we needed something from the governor's office, it was really hard to get a response. And so I know we were far from perfect on this. Perfect isn't even the right word, but and Governor Baker, started his career in government at outside of the central entity in Health and Human Services, and so we both had a real respect for what it takes to do the work in government, and what we were trying to focus on is, again, acknowledging the strength there, and then really trying to bring in additional expertise, know-how, support on problems, and as much as possible to defer to the selected leaders, the head of the Department of Children and Families, the head of transportation and so forth, and work in support of them. And again, I know we were far from perfect on this, but that was the intention, that was the idea and the approach. So it was a service-oriented approach, and then really trying to because we had been there, understand what it meant to be in an agency, and then in turn what the opportunity and responsibility was of a governor's office to help make things better.
Mhm. So, and the results framework, it doesn't just apply in government. It's really applicable in any setting, any sector, any organization. And the results framework is 4 elements. People are policy, hire the leaders, build a team, follow the facts, uncover points of pain, and gather evidence. As an attorney, that makes me really happy. Um, People are policy. As an HR person, that makes me happy as well. The third is focus on how, what to do and how to do it. And the fourth element of the results framework is push for results, measure, evaluate, adjust, and repeat. And throughout the book, you have tips and tactics that really summarize not just the chapter, but practical steps, best practices that leaders can apply in their role. So you don't just talk about leading in government, you use some case studies from private sector as well. So talk about the results framework and how you and the governor came to these 4 elements.
Yeah, thank you. So people are policy, follow the facts, focus on how, push for results. I think we spent enough time in the earlier questions just on the importance of people. Why do we focus on people? People are the actual capacity to get things done. And that in our experience, we have found that just by saying that you're going to do something without providing the additional and appropriate people support, and hiring in state government is really, really hard, that that focus is incredibly important. People provide the capacity to get things done. Follow the facts. The 2 pieces there. The kinds of facts that most CEOs, executives, managers will follow will be reports, spreadsheets, budgets, staffing levels, and that kind of thing. We really came to appreciate the points of pain of the customer, and then also the points of pain of people who are delivering the service. And so we spend time listening to stories, listening to anecdotes, and really trying to understand the points of pain of those who are receiving the service and delivering the service, and combine that with the data evidence. And Jessie, it's not the kind of data evidence that you might find legal evidence. It's really the kind of data evidence that, in reports, budgets, spreadsheets, staffing levels, and so forth. The facts are the navigation points for the focusing on the problems. And I've started to call this question X. What is the problem you're trying to solve? So what is the specific problem you're trying to solve? We go back to the points of pain. We go back to the data evidence. And then from there, it's the focus on how. First, the what to do, and think about this as the charter of activities, the programs, the additional funds, the if there's new legislative language needed, a description of the benefits and so forth, the what, the promise, and that's where a lot of public sector organizations might stop, is on the description of the what. And then for us, it's the focus on how. And of all the elements, it's the focus on how that we know takes the most time. And this is, super attention on your tech, your IT, on your approach, your project management approach. And we've done this in a variety of different ways. And then the final item, the push for results, it is the honest look at how you've done at resolving the problems. And this is all about performance metrics. And you've got a bunch of people I know who are listening who are terrific at really looking at performance metrics. And then importantly, having a discussion with leadership about, so what does it mean? And what are the possible adjustments that need to be made? And then for leadership to be okay to say, you know what, that worked and we should do more of it. And it's much harder for leadership to say, that didn't work. What are the adjustments that we need to make? Let's make those adjustments and then move on and then measure again. So when you get to the push for results part of the framework, it's this repetitive measure, evaluate, adjust, repeat. And if the adjustments will go all the way back.
Not anymore.
Oh,
He seems like a really nice guy, and he wrote a book, and I was just.
So someone,
Laurel, you're on there you go. Okay. That the push for results, the adjustments could go back to people. It could go back to a reevaluation of the facts, or it could go back to your project approach.
okay, so then you talk about, you say this in the book, leaders must create environments where both good news and bad news can be raised. Messengers who bring bad news should be praised. Now, I'm not going to go into politics, but we have seen over the last couple of years, really, that bad news is not welcome. There is a certain perspective or truth that people want to hear. And we've seen leaders in different sectors who shun bad news, who don't want to hear a different perspective. Can you talk about the importance of opening the channel so that not just good news, but bad news gets to the people who are making decisions, to the leaders, so that they're getting the full perspective? And I'm going to note here that if you have a question on anything that we've discussed thus far, please type in the chat and we'll get to you. But yeah, how do we ensure that the good and bad news gets to us as leaders?
Yeah, and I would say I'd take the concept of leader down to a manager, a supervisor. It is really hard to, it is really hard for people that are working with you and for you to let you know when something isn't going well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say it is really hard to create the forums of safety for conversations where an individual or a team can bring something up and know that it will be heard and not, it'll be heard for what it is and not be taken as a negative mark. And that takes some practice all the way around, but both for the individuals who have real information to raise, and also for the supervisor, manager, executive, to create the forum where and demonstrate that the honest perspective is really helpful. I want to say using metrics is a very helpful tool. And if the discussion about the metrics is about the metrics, it moves it away from the possibility that it is about an individual. So you can have the conversation about performance, whatever that might be, the number of benefits that are getting out, on time performance, the accuracy, customer satisfaction, etc. And while there are individuals who are responsible, I've found that when you have a conversation about the number, so to speak, it provides a way to make it less about the individual and more about the problem and what to do. Governor Baker likes to say, be really hard on the facts and be soft on the people. And that's really important. And it's really hard.
I love that. And it is really hard because sometimes we attribute the problem to the person and they're just trying to manage it. One of the things you talked about in an interview that I did with you for the Leadership at Work series is asking the right questions from multiple perspectives, so that the focus is less on the person who's giving the information, but on really the ecosystem that they're working in, to get them the resources and tools they need to address those problems. So then you also talk about resisting binary choices, the and or problem. And so the goal is here to create transformative dynamics. So resist or and embrace and. Explain that.
Yeah, I'd say early on at Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, which was it's a health maintenance organization, an HMO health plan that was effectively in bankruptcy when just as Charlie Baker, before he was governor, took it over, and a few of us went to help. It became really clear that the mission was to provide really much better service and reduce the cost of doing it. And there were competitors that were doing that. And we found that as people were defining what needed to be done, they would say, you could do this or you could do this. And both needed to be done. And it was kind of shocking to say both needed to be done. And then people went back, and what they came back with was really dynamic. It was inspiring. It broke the and or. And so so I have found continually that when you are faced with ors, and there probably are some things that are absolutely, binary choices, but more often than not, you're going to find that the combination of things can prove incredibly powerful. And by asking the team what they would do to achieve both, it's really cool. It's really powerful in terms of what you see coming back. And a leader, a manager, a supervisor can ask for those ors. It can, and they're all over the place in what we do programmatically, what we do operationally.
I remember one meeting you said all of the best ideas don't have to come from Massachusetts. And the ability to embrace partnerships across different sectors, across regions is really critical point of addressing issues. I want to pivot a bit to the challenges that we're having as a country around systemic racism. And this is impacting everyone. There's a city did a report in 2020 around the cost of racism in the country. And it's essentially trillions of dollars that the economy is losing. Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas and also Massachusetts and Boston have a number of reports. I'm sure the entire Federal Reserve system has some reports on the cost to the economy when we don't include people of ethnic and racial backgrounds, not just in employment opportunities, but business opportunities. And since the murder of George Floyd and a series of other tragic events, there's just been a reawakening around systemic racism. There's been a series of public displays of solidarity and a lot of performative allyship. So the appearance of change, but really in organizations, not much has been done. And with the great resignation, and the market being what it is, talent have the opportunity to move around. First, can you share with us your journey around this particular issue, systemic racism, diversity, and equity? What's been your personal journey around this?
Yeah, and I think you're right to call it personal, because I think it is personal, and for everybody, it needs to be personal. In the 1990s, I was working for Governor Weld, and Charlie Baker was the Secretary of Administration and Finance. And one of the things that I began to work on was the reform of how the state purchased things, procurement reform. And we looked at a whole bunch of other states and looked at some large companies who had similar profiles in terms of the kinds of things that they might purchase or how they did purchasing. And there were two people that were part of the work group that we put together. One woman who's become a friend and a colleague over the years, Antonia Jimenez, and then she's from Puerto Rico, and then a Black man. And as we were going through the issues of procurement, it became really clear to me that the kinds of issues that they raised for people of color, small business people of color, and the kinds of hurdles that our state system had in place were, when you looked at it, they were arbitrary and they were ridiculous and hard to fulfill, so that there was a built-in, giving people the benefit of the doubt, but perhaps not. There was a built-in prejudice for larger, more established, more experienced entities, and the work was bid in large chunks, not in smaller chunks. And so for me, this was eye-opening, both in terms of what it meant for the purchase of services and my circle of friends and colleagues were largely white, and here were two people smarter than me, and they had different friends and relationships, and I wanted to work with them, and I wanted their friends and colleagues to work with us as well. So for me, it was this, you know, wasn't a day of reckoning. It was probably several months of, there's a different way to think about the procurement of goods that the state is buying. And how do you do that? How do you advance that? It's really hard to make those changes. And then secondly is that the best organizations are going to be the most diverse, because they're going to bring in the most diverse communities, and all their brain power and all of their life connections. And so so those couple of things were pivotal for me. So those were in the 1990s. Work I did at Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, some of it was focused on that. Some work I did at Northeastern was focused on that. And then when I became the chief of staff, there were two different offices that I proposed to the governor that were different than previous administrations. One was the strategic operations team, and some of those guys helped you, Jessie, on your hiring stuff. And then the other was the Office of Opportunity and Access. They both reported directly to me, and they both, you know, on the Office of Opportunity and Access was focused on working with our procurement division and procurement people across the state on increasing the women-owned and the minority-owned and and we created an LGBT category of ownership as well on purchasing, and then similarly around hiring, and then went further, not just on hiring but on boards and commissions. And so I was a younger person then, and I feel like, so going back to have we made progress, I'd go back to I'd say yes, and that
Hey, there's a bird.
measure the results, really hold people accountable and measure results.
Yes, hold people and accountable and measure results. That is important. And I think we have made some progress, but certainly not enough. I think in some places we've regressed because there's this level of comfort that people have now in making blatantly racist statements. And cultures are hard to change because it's not just, it's a personal journey around this, but there's also organizational, community, and national and international responsibilities that we have. You talked about really the competitive advantage that organizations have when they are able to draw, include, and embrace different communities. McKinsey has a report on the benefits of diversity, and not just diversity for diversity's sake. Because I always say diversity without inclusion is window dressing. So you have a lot of this tokenism, but people are not part of the decision-making process. They're not really contributing at the highest levels, and they're not being recognized for their contributions. And the McKinsey study says that organizations that are diverse and inclusive outperform their competitors by about 35%, I believe is the statistic or the data point. So, so what are we getting wrong around this issue, systemic racism? What are we getting wrong?
So Jessie, I hope that's a question you're asking every single person you do one of these interviews with. And
Absolutely.
I guess I want to flip it to where are the places where things are going okay, and then well, you ask a great question, what are we getting wrong? And then I feel like I personally am, I have defined the problem in a way that I understand, and that is people in jobs, people on boards, and the amount of dollars spent. And I know that that's not enough. And so I guess I would like to join a conversation about what are other ways to look at the problem, and then what are other ways to have a proposal that we can measure and make progress against. And so I can think about that in schools in terms of graduation levels, and then jobs, and then the financial rewards of a job. So there's I can think of it in terms of housing and opportunities. But I think maybe we need to be aggressively measuring where things are at on a continual basis with specific interventions in mind.
And my perspective on this, and I talk about this pretty often, is that it's a personal journey, but it's a journey that requires change in our hearts and minds. And all of the laws in the world, as an employment attorney, I've seen and addressed the discrimination complaints and claims, and it's about attitudes and perspectives. And education, awareness, seeing ourselves and looking in the mirror around really what is our personal journey, how have we grown, and be accountable there, and be accountable in our networks, and committing to a lifelong journey. And then organizationally, it's about commitment at the top, having the capacity and resources committed to change, making sure that it's not just one person who is responsible for this, but it's an organizational commitment. And that's an integrated approach. And that we realize this, we're talking about cultural change. And I can't remember who said that, but culture will always eat strategy for breakfast. So if we don't have the systems in place to reinforce the change, it's never going to be as successful. So, the last few questions I have is really around the pandemic. Of course, there have been some disparities that have come out of that, and have really underscored the challenges that different communities are having. But the leading through this, I'm sure has been quite and not an adventure, but quite challenging. In the book, you talk about just the many steps that were taken to secure PPEs, and that initially the PPEs were, well, I guess might be the first set of PPEs were stolen at the Port of New York. And there was a concerted effort working with the National Guard. And I believe we have someone here who is in the National Guard, a leader in the National Guard, Ron Couples. Just wanted to highlight you and thank you for your service. But you worked with the National Guard. It was a concerted effort to ensure that the PPEs got to where they needed to be. I mean, just at the end, the book really reads like a movie. So talk about just what was that experience? That must have been an emotional roller coaster for you all.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't it an emotional roller coaster for all of us? Ron, I was with Governor Baker a few weeks ago, and General Keefe. I'm assuming you're Massachusetts National Guard.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. General Keefe was there, and the governor handed him a copy of the book, and he said, "Go to page 243 or something, Ron." And because that's where it really, and it's the governor really did his praise and thank you for your your uh, your colleagues' service throughout COVID. The boy, Jesse, I don't even know where to start on COVID, but the governor likes to talk about it as something that happened in 3 acts, and maybe now we're in the 4th act. But the first act is the scramble. The second act was the beginnings of the recovery, and the third act is the race to vaccinate. And the scramble was the first 60 days of, and we tried to capture that in the book, of just how little we knew, and the terrible information coming out of Washington, D.C., and then the efforts of every state on its own trying to figure out what to do. And I really think that a lot of the pain that we're feeling now in many dimensions comes back to the Trump administration and how they handled the beginnings of COVID. It's just like this super highlight of what not to do. So maybe I'll answer the question by talking about sort of reframing it in the with the results framework. So one of the very first things the governor did was people, and he set up a command structure, and I helped with that and the setting up of that, and to make sure that that was resourced really, really well. And it was much better to over-resource than under-resource, given what we didn't know. The second thing was this incredible hunger for facts, and there were rumors, there were hypotheses, and then there were very few facts, but continually chasing the facts, coming up with the facts. Then the governor set up a medical advisory board to review what we believed were facts and ideas with. The third, and the points of pain were incredibly obvious. Actually, so painful. I remember the governor being so upset that the idea that the economy would be, so much of the economy would be shut down, because he understood what that meant for people paycheck to paycheck, what it meant for the street, what it meant for communities. And he also was just so upset because there were so few options at the beginning. There was almost no testing, there was almost no PPE, and how to address those things. The third part of the framework really was then, once you've identified the problem, was figuring out what were the actions to take, and then the intensity on the how. And then lots of measuring of data, lots of honest conversations about the actual performance metrics. At one point, we were given a D, the state, for the vaccine rollout. That really upset the governor, as it should. And then everyone really jumped in with a mega push. Massachusetts has been for a long time the leader in vaccinations by population. And I hope everybody on this call is vaccinated. So, because it really helps if you get sick, and we're all going to get COVID at some point.
Yeah. And you in the book, you shared that there were these daily 30-minute meetings with Secretary Mary Lou Sudders, the governor, hospital CEOs. Um, and you're talking about high-powered people in a room, not in a room, but on a call every single morning. How do you get the best out of people during this time and keep it to 30 minutes? Because you're talking about a lot of CEOs. What kind of questions were you asking the CEOs? What was happening in those moments?
Um, so the meetings were led by the governor, and there were two parts to the meetings. One was he'd always ask what's going on, what is it like, and he would make sure to speak not only to the Boston CEOs, because there's a huge tendency in Massachusetts to focus on Boston, but ask the Worcester CEO, ask the Western Mass CEO, the CEO in the Cape, what's going on, what are your issues effectively, what are your points of pain? And then in those conversations, so some specific things would come up, and as they came up, the governor would propose, here's an initial way we can address it by effectively, assigning it to folks to look at what could be done, and then with a commitment saying, can you get back in 2 days? Can you get back tomorrow? Can you get back next week? On that, but it was usually, can you get back later today or tomorrow within 2 days? The second part of the meeting was often an update with what was going on from the command center, the COVID command center, and literally updates on everything from capacity to test, staffing, help, PPE, and other services, and then asking for comments on the rollout and what was working and what was not. And then everybody split. So knowing that you were coming back the next day was helpful. And eventually these everyday meetings moved to a couple times a week, and then once a week, and then I don't know how often. I believe they're still happening, but the intent of needing them, part of addressing a problem is knowing how often you need to have leaders in a room to share information and then to make decisions. And in a crisis like COVID, that was certainly daily for that group, while the COVID command structure was meeting many times a day.
Well, from getting a D, I'm not sure who gave you the D, but from getting a D to being an exemplary leader in the fight against COVID, I would say, and on behalf of a number of people I know who said that the experience had improved from the start to the end. Thank you for what you and the governor and the National Guard, first responders, and so many have done to keep Massachusetts safe. So as we move into the Q&As, I see questions in the chat. We'll get to every single one of them, unless we get like 20. But I will end this part of the interview with really how the administration started. I will mention Dr. Roberto Miranda, who was pastor of the Line of Judah, who was actually a colleague and fellow trustee of mine at Gordon College. He was the first person I invited to this interview. Of course, he was flattered to be able to join, and then he suddenly passed. Which was a huge blow to so many people. But Governor Baker talks about the interfaith religious ceremony or prayer ceremony that was held at Pastor Miranda's church. And he shares a scripture that it's Philippians 2:3. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility, value others above yourselves. And I think this is really, it really is how he and you have approached leadership, and that this is less about you and preserving your role and your power, and more about finding solutions to problems that affect people, and then passing the baton of leadership to others. And I was in that ceremony. I did introduce myself to the governor, and I told them I want to work for you. Of course, he looked at me like, ma'am, not the time. But that was a beautiful service, and I remember it well. So I do want to honor Pastor Roberto Miranda's memory with that. But also say that leadership is a continuum. And it's about building future leaders to solve problems that affect people. What is your last word on that specifically? What do you want your legacy to be? What do you want people to remember about you and what you've done?
Oh, Jessie. So I hope that I didn't expect a question to be directed to be so personal. So I hope that people that I've worked with will think that I listened, really listened, that I tried as best I could to provide them personal support and organizational systematic support, and that there was some kindness here, and you don't have to be an asshole when you're in these roles.
Yeah.
And that life's really short.
Yeah, people will remember not what you said, but how you treated them. And I would say we're here because you treated me with kindness, and you supported me when I absolutely needed it the most. And so I want to thank you for that, and thank you for the opportunity to interview once again for the Leadership at Work series. And please stay tuned. I'm going to get to the questions, but remember, you get 20% off your purchase if you use the St. Cyr Results 2022 code, which expires at the end of this month, June 30. Results: getting beyond politics to get important work done. Steve embodies this, the governor embodies this, I know from personal experience. So please make sure you get the book. Before we get into the questions, anyone's birthday today or the last 2 or 3 days? Because I'm going to send you a copy of the book. Please type in the chat and let me know. Hopefully it's not everybody's birthday. But let's get to the questions. So the first was actually from Laurel. She says, bring up the elephant in the room. The MBTA is again still in crisis. What is your perspective on making changes that are sustainable past any individuals and change organizational culture?
Yeah. Laurel, I can count on you for asking a hard question, a hard and appropriate question. Laurel used to work at the MBTA, for folks that don't know that, and I don't believe you're still there. But it was right in the thick of it, of a lot of good problem solving, great fact stuff. I think the and looking at London and as an example, and the transport for London at one point in the last 10 years was considered by many the best transit system in the world. And they rose from the ashes literally in the 1980s. There was a horrible fire on the London Metro. It wasn't called Transport for London. That caused many deaths, many dozens of deaths. And it was the largest number of deaths in London since World War II. Tragic. And that was a horrible wake-up call to how bad things have gotten on the London transportation system. So that's in the I'm going to say mid 1980s. It might have been 1988. It might have been 1983, but in the 1980s. By the 2000s, some more than 25 years later, it was named by many the best transit system in the world. And there were three things there. One was an incredible need for deep capital investment. One. Two, a major adjustment in governance. And then three, time. It took 20 years to bring enough things around to make it effective. And I think in the last 6 years, Laurel, you would know better exactly when the investment really began to happen at the T. I think there's been about $8 billion of capital investment. That is a big number, and 6 or 7 years is a meaningful amount of time, but it's about a third of what is needed. One. Two, I do think the governance structure, if they, when and they will act with strength and care, having it aligned with the term of the governor is really important, and I believe that's the case. I'm not sure of that, but clear accountability is important. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to go back to the binary point that you made, Jessie. And I guess if there was a do-over, I would say the binary point would be, and it's not to say that this wasn't the case, but to even emphasize it more, is for the capital investment and day-to-day safety maintenance of operations. What would it take there? And I am not close enough to know where the investments are, and I know that these things take time, but that would be. And then Laurel, I think you have to address the staffing issues, and with Jessie there and Matt St. Hilaire and others, you guys at the team made unbelievable progress in hiring, and that takes sustained effort and even amped up effort, especially with COVID. So with the T, I think significant progress made, significant investment made, but where that needs to continue for another dozen years anyways.
Yeah.
And the governance piece, I know is better. I hope it's clear enough. And then the staffing takes, it needs another push. It needs Jessie to go back and bang it out some more.
Oh, good.
Can everyone just mute yourself, please? And that interruption was just at the point where Steve said I should go back. Miracles do happen, don't they? Maybe that'll happen. We don't know. But yes, there's a lot of work still to be done. Thank you, Laurel, for that important question. And if you want to unmute yourself, if you want to add anything else to that, feel free to do so. But I want to get to Dr. Mike Hammond, president of Gordon College, who recounts the interfaith prayer service in the book as well with Reverend Dr. Roberto Miranda. And he has a question. Dr. Hammond, I don't know if you're there, but if you want to unmute yourself, feel free to ask the question.
Sure. Well, I appreciate, Stephen, I appreciate your, not just the content, but your posture and your tenor. I think that's, just hearing you talk and reflect in a very patient and calm way just testifies to that approach of trying to assume the worst of people is oftentimes what takes us down the wrong pathway. And so to listen and try to look for the best, I think you're modeling that even in our conversation. So thank you. And I just wondered, as you reflect on that, in the book, Governor Baker talks about how meaningful it was to be surrounded around his inauguration at that interfaith service with rabbis and others praying to commit the term of his leadership to the best of his abilities. What role do you see interfaith dialogue playing as we think about all the different chasms that we try to cross politically? How, even in your own experience working alongside the governor, you mentioned coming at this from a Protestant and a Jewish background. So I'm just curious to hear more about that.
Yeah. So the governor has throughout his term, I think he's increasingly loved to go to church and Morning Baptist. I think he was there recently, and going to services at synagogues, and I believe I recall he was also recently at a Muslim chapel. So I think there is a deep humanity to the public sector work that it needs to be honored, and that's back to Jessie's words, that's an individual road. And so I think when we see it, we should support it and respect it, and when it's not there, is to perhaps help create the opportunities for, and particularly as you expressed it, interfaith experiences.
Okay, and let's see, I did get a message that someone's birthday was on the 19th, and so you're going to get the book in the mail. Hopefully we can express mail it, because snail mail is very slow. Any final questions? Just we have a few minutes left for a final question. Feel free to unmute yourself. Terry Carter, poet laureate of the city of Medford, I should know, 5-time author. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm really sorry. I had a commitment that I really tried very hard to get out of this morning. I was unable to, so I'm late to the party. But my question for you, Steve, is this. dealing with a board, I'm being transparent here, dealing with a board that's somewhat dysfunctional in the nonprofit world right now. And yet we still have a mandate, you know, those of us who work at the staff level, to serve, you know, people, older folks, in between folks, youth. What can at the staff level, what can we do to make sure that we continue to provide services when we're not necessarily getting the support, or when we don't have the appropriate folks on our board to make sure that we have all the resources we need?
Terry, you're asking a question that plagues so many organizations, right? And that the staff are more than willing, and that the leadership might not be there. So there's a lot of, like, I want to say, I'll try not to say the obvious things, but I will end up saying some of the obvious things. So first, I always think it's important to hopefully you're in an environment where it's safe enough for you to speak out to the CEO so that it's quite clear that you might do this alone if you have a relationship, or you might bring in 2 or 3 or 4 people to talk with the CEO or the COO, so that they, 1, hear how much you care, and 2, hear that you're talking about what real problems are. Don't assume that the leadership actually knows what the issues are. One of the things that I try to reinforce with leaders is you're probably not getting good information. You are undoubtedly getting the information that people want you to hear. And I call it getting out of the tower, is go talk to staff, go visit clients, go visit the people who are providing the services. So first, talk to your executive leadership. And you might be able to do that alone, but there's safety in numbers. And I don't know where you are in the organization, Terry. And then taking that to the next step. Usually on a board, there's at least one board member that's, I'll use the word sympathetic, and is somebody that you can reach out to. I would, just consider that strategy. But go in because you care. Go in with some specifics as to what the situation is, and everybody loves to have also some idea of what some of the solutions might be. And I will stop there. But Terry, keep doing what you're doing.
So thank you all for joining me and Steve in this important conversation, this interview about his book. And he is the co-author of Getting Beyond Politics to Get Important Work Done. Remember that you get 20% off your purchase. If you go to the Harvard Business Review website or Amazon.com, you can find the book there, but you have to go on the Harvard Business Review website in order to use the code St. Cyr Results 2022 to get 20% off your purchase. And the code expires at the end of this month, June 30. So rush and get this book. I promise, whether you are in the public sector, private sector, healthcare, higher education, or anything in between, this book and the results framework will benefit you as it's been a model for leadership, effective leadership for Steve and Governor Charlie Baker. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.